Hi. So just a very quick introduction before I start. My name is Gautam Gadgil and I run Enrisen, which is a study abroad company. And thanks firstly to Radhika and to IKEVA for organizing this and all the effort required in organizing this. So thanks so much. What I wanted to do today was give everyone a quick insight into what Ivy League university admissions look like and what are the things that students need to be focusing on. And given that students I suspect we have a couple of students here and we also have a lot of parents here. So what I'm going to try and do is cover both the undergrad university applications and also the post-grad or graduate university application. So we'll sort of go into both the aspects. I have kept some time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, but given that we have about 20 plus participants, so let's do this, right? So if you have a question which is very urgent, which needs to be addressed before we move forward, feel free to interrupt me and we can talk about that, or else leave your questions till the end and then we can address all the questions after the presentation. So I hope that works for everyone. Now, I think, I mean, everyone's heard the term Ivy League, right? But it's important to, important as well as interesting to understand the origination of this term Ivy League. So in the 1950s, actually, Ivy League was a sports competition. So it was a very elite sports competition that was run between 8 private universities in the northeastern United States, right? So a very small region of the United States, and some very high quality prestigious private universities were part of this. So you can see the names of the universities there. You had Brown, Columbia, Princeton, Harvard, Dartmouth, Penn, Cornell, and Yale. Right? So these were the original Ivy League schools, and even today, technically, these are the Ivy League schools. Right? However, in the context that we look at Ivy League schools these days, we don't restrict it only to those 8 schools, right? Because that's very restrictive. That's only in the United States. That's also only in a certain part of the United States, and those schools are all private schools as well, right? So a more generic meaning of the term Ivy League school is top universities across the world, right? So there is no hard and fast definition of what an Ivy League school is in the current context. But typically, I look at Ivy League schools as in the US, the top 20 universities, and in other countries, the top 5 or 10 universities, depending on what country it is. Right? So in the US, for example, you have, apart from the earlier 8 schools that we spoke about, you have the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, you have Stanford, you have Duke, John Hopkins, University of California, Berkeley, University of Chicago, and California Institute of Technology, that is Caltech. So that's an example of few of the top universities in the US. Outside of the US, some of the top universities in Canada, you have University of British Columbia, and you have University of Toronto. In the UK, you have Cambridge and you have University of London. Australia, you have Monash and you have University of Melbourne. And Singapore, you have NUS, and in Europe, continental Europe, you have Technical University of Munich in Germany. So this is just an example of some of the Ivy League schools that you can find across the world. Before we dwell into profile building and what it actually takes to get into an Ivy League school, I just wanted to quickly touch upon what the application essentials are. I think many of you would already be aware, but these are sort of some of the things that you need to have before you start applying to universities, right? So you need to, one, make sure that you are applying to universities on the right platform, right? This varies from university to university. Some universities have their own application system. Some universities use a common application system. Again, there are differences between countries as well, right? So applying on the right platform is important. Coursework and grades. So obviously the educational background, transcript, etc. Relevant extracurricular activities, and we are going to talk a lot more about this later on in the presentation. standardized test scores. So you need to have, depending on which country, university program you're planning to attend, you need to have your either your SAT scores or your ACT scores or your GRE, TOEFL, GMAT, IELTS, etc. So those are the standardized tests. The letters of recommendations. Most universities and programs across the world will require you to submit letters of recommendation as part of your application. Then you'll have to submit certain essays, which are documents such as personal statement, or there are different names that are used for personal statements, but you can call the I mean, they're sometimes called a statement of purpose, sometimes a goals essay, sometimes personal statement, etc. But essentially, these essays talk about your motivation for doing that particular program at that particular point of time. Right? And then you have also submit a resume, and many universities, as part of their application system, will also conduct a interview, which would either be a face-to-face interview or a remote interview over platforms such as Zoom, etc. When you talk about Ivy League universities specifically, these are some of the broad challenges that students face, right? If you look at most top universities across the world, increasingly Indian students are applying to those universities, right? So on an average, every top university, every year, there is an increase of applications from India by anywhere between 8 to 15%, right? So number of applicants from India are increasing. And while universities don't have a quota system, but at the same time, top universities prefer to have diversity within their student body, right? So they don't want a lot of people coming from the same background. So essentially, all Indian students are competing with each other to get into these top universities. And that's where making your profile stand out becomes extremely important, because competition is intense. Not only Indian students, but you have students applying from probably 80 plus countries across the world into most of these Ivy League universities, right? So you're competing not only with people from your own country, you are competing with people, and generally the cream is applying to top universities. So you're competing with the cream from different countries across the world. And the fourth challenge, usually with Ivy League universities, many of these Ivy League universities are private universities. There are exceptions, of course, but many of them are private universities and can tend to be relatively expensive, right? So limited availability of scholarships and financial aid can also be a challenge. I am going to cover a little bit about scholarships and financial aid at the end of the presentation. So I want to start off with undergrad. We'll do a few slides on Ivy League applications for undergrad students, and then we'll move on to Ivy League applications for graduate or postgrad students, right? So what is it that Ivy League schools look for when it comes to assessing an undergrad application, right? And in one phrase, Ivy League universities are looking for future potential, right? So they want to get a sense of what your future potential is in terms of how successful you will become in life, and how that university can help you in achieving your future potential, right? So understanding this is 50% of the task in terms of being able to crack Ivy League admissions, right? Because if your entire application is devoted towards demonstrating your future potential, and you can relate your achievements, etc., to what you are going to be able to achieve in the future, uh, half the battle is won, right? So this is something that is extremely important, and we'll talk a little more about this in the following slides. Why is it so important? Why do universities look at future success, right? And then it's all a cycle, right? Because if a university is reputed and well known, they're going to get more applicants. If they get more applicants, they can be more selective about the students that they admit to their universities. If they are selective, they're generally getting the better quality students. Better quality students essentially means people who become successful in future in their lives, and that creates publicity or visibility for the university, and that increases the reputation of the university, right? So it's cyclical, and it all revolves around the future success of students, right? So which is why universities, the Ivy League universities, are so focused on admitting students who show potential for future success. This might sound a little repetitive, but in general, given that we work with so many students and parents, in India we are so achievement specific, and we are focused, and we are so focused on what we have done in the past and in the present, that we generally tend to ignore the future, right? So Ivy League admissions is not about what you have achieved in the past or what you have done in the past. It is all about what those achievements or what those things that you've done talk about or signal about your future success, right? So extremely important again to talk or to sort of relate all your achievements, etc., to your future, the potential for future success. Some of the classic pitfalls to avoid, right? And we see a lot of this when with a lot of students who work with us. Copying a friend or relative, right? Because everyone in all our families, we have had people, whether it's friends, relatives, uncles, cousins, etc., who have gone abroad for their education, right? So it's very easy to sort of follow the path that they took and just decide universities, decide countries, decide programs based on what someone else in the family or someone else in your circle has done. The challenge with that is everyone's circumstances are different, everyone's goals are different, what everyone's potential is different, and so you have to look at it from a case to case perspective. Having too many cooks in the kitchen, right? Again, a classic this thing where you try and get too many people involved in your process, try and take feedback from too many people, which relates or which sort of results in creating confusion about what the right path forward for you is likely to be. Focusing too much on scores, right? Now, this is extremely important. This is extremely important for undergraduate education. Scores are important, right? So the kind of scores that a student scores in 9th standard, 10th standard, 11th standard, 12th standard, etc., are important. The kind of scores that the student gets on standardized tests are also important. However, just by acing your GPA or by acing your standardized tests, you are not guaranteed an admission in a Ivy League school, right? Because think about the peer group that you are competing with. Everyone is a topper. Everyone has done well in their education. Everyone has scored very high in their SATs or TOEFL or IELTS or whatever test that I've written. So that by itself is not going to be a sort of distinguishing factor for you while getting into a top university. In my experience, there are two kinds of people who get into Ivy League schools. The first category or the first kind of people who get into Ivy League schools are geniuses, right? So who have just sort of excelled in a specific area, right? Which might be, let's say, someone has a patent to his or her name, or has made a scientific discovery, or someone has played sport at an international level, or in terms of educational outcomes, they are probably in the top 0.001 percentile across the country or across their peer group, right? So that's one category of students who get into Ivy League schools, and in most cases they can get into Ivy League schools just because of one exceptional achievement that they have. But that's probably only 20% of the students who get into Ivy League schools. The balance 80% of the students who get Ivy League admits are typically students who are very good, not necessarily exceptional, but very good at multiple things. Right? So they might be very good at with their academics. They might have some really good extracurricular activities, involvement, etc. Done well at sport, done well in art, or done well with something else. Plus, they are able to demonstrate a drive and a motivation that Ivy League universities are looking for. So these are typically, and most of the students are going to fall into category 2. So having just great scores is not going to be enough to get into Ivy League schools. Having a well-rounded profile is extremely important. Fourth point, overcorrecting and trying too hard to be too creative, right? So now, just as you're going to have multiple strengths in your profile, every student has some sort of challenges in their profile as well, right? So maybe someone doesn't have adequate co-curricular activities, or someone does not or has not done a lot of community activities, etc. it's not about focusing on what you don't have. It's all about focusing on what you have and how you can demonstrate your future potential based on what you have or what you have done. Misunderstanding what well-rounded is. Again, a classic problem that we see with a lot of students in India. Uh, the general perception is the more I do, the better it is, right? So it's more is not more. When you do activities, when you do things, it's the quality that matters more than the quantity. So from an extracurriculars perspective, for example, just doing 10 different things is going to add very limited value to your application compared to doing two things really, really well over a long period of time and being able to show progression in those two things that you have chosen for yourself. Right? So that's important. Misunderstanding what is actually unique. Right? Again, this is important because just by getting 90% in your 10th standard or 10th, 11th standard or 12th standard, that is not going to make you unique or distinguish yourself, because that is the kind of peer group that you are competing with when it comes to Ivy League universities, right? So what really matters is, so unique can only be a package of various parts of your profile or your personality, right? So you create uniqueness through the multiple sort of positives that are there in your profile, and not by just a small single parameter like your 10 standard score or 12 standard score. So when you are looking at getting into an Ivy League university for your undergrad, there are certain things that you need to achieve by your 12th standard, right? Because during your 12th standard is when typically you are applying to universities. So these are certain sort of goals that you need to set for yourself, that this is what I need to achieve by my 12th standard, which increases my potential of getting into a top university or an Ivy League university, right? So strong test scores is a given. We've discussed that. Consistently strong grades. Also, this is extremely important because the way the Indian education system is structured is, 10th standard, because we have boards, etc. There is a lot of emphasis on 10th standard, and then again there is a lot of emphasis on the 12th standard. But people or students tend to sort of put their guard down in the 11th standard, and that can be extremely challenging when it comes to applying to universities abroad. Because think about it from this perspective: you apply for universities while you are in your 12th standard, right? So at the time of applying, you don't have your 12th standard scores, right? So essentially, the universities are making a decision based on how you did academically in your 9th standard, 10th standard, and 11th standard, right? So if you have had a great 10th standard, but then you take 11th standard lightly and grades drop, that can be a big challenge in terms of university application. So strong grades are important, but grades trending up is also equally important, right? So 10th standard should usually be better than 9th standard, 11th standard should be better than 10th standard. Third point, evidence of deep engagement with a few extracurricular activities, right? As we discussed, it's not about how many extracurricular activities you do. It is the quantity that is not important. The quantity is not important, the quality is important, right? So choose 2 or 3 activities that you are interested in, that excite you, and that you are good in, and then follow them through over a period of time, right? You can't just decide in 12th standard that now I need to apply for university, so I need to pick up an extracurricular activity. It doesn't work that way. You need to show involvement in those activities over a period of time, generally over a period of years. Evidence of giving back, volunteering, or thinking beyond oneself, right? Now, this is extremely important. And unfortunately, in the Indian context, in our sort of education system, we don't give a lot of importance to any kind of social work or volunteering, or sort of doing something for the society at large. But across different countries, there is a lot of emphasis sort of given to how you are able to think beyond yourself and sort of contribute to the larger society. And having evidence of this, again, built up over a period of time, not something that you do for a month or two, but something that you've done over a period of time, can add a lot of value to your Ivy League applications. In fact, it is almost a prerequisite, right? So an Ivy League application without a significant evidence of giving back, volunteering, or some kind of community service is very unlikely to be successful, unless that person is exceptional in a certain area. And then the evidence of forward-leaning, grab life by the reins attitude, which again are a demonstration of your future abilities, right? In terms of how do you achieve some of these, I think we discussed some of them. It's important to have an action plan. It's very difficult if you just start preparing for this in standard 11 or standard 12, because you're not going to have time to be able to build up your profile over a period of time, right? So ideally start by 8th or 9th standard, have a mentor who you trust, who can guide you through this entire process, so that there's a single person guiding you and there's no conflict of information, or there's no confusion that gets created in terms of what works and what doesn't work. Do not ignore your grade 11 scores. Can't emphasize this enough because we see it all the time. And also there are certain value add profile building activities that you can consider, because they can have a significant impact on your applications. But always think of it in terms of the cost, because some of these can be quite expensive. A couple of them that some of our students have done in the past and continue to do are summer schools and international internships. So very quickly, a summer school is basically an opportunity where after your 10th standard, ideally, a student can go to a Ivy League university for a period of 4 or 5 weeks and take up certain courses in their areas of interest, right? So if someone, for example, is interested in mechanical engineering, they can take a course, let's say, in advanced physics during the summer vacation at the Ivy League university. This does two things, right? One is it gives you or gives the student a real life experience of what studying in an Ivy League school is like, and whether it is something that they want to do over a 3 or 4 year period, right? So that's important. Also, from a profile building perspective, there is a good chance that the student will be able to get a letter of recommendation from the professor who was teaching that particular course, and that can add tremendously to the student's profile. Right? So that's something that budget permitting is something that can be considered. Similarly, there are international internships which are remote, where you don't necessarily have to go abroad. But you can do remote internships with professors from Ivy League universities, etc. It could be a research topic or something like that, which happens over 8 or 10 weeks, which again can add value to a student's profile. And at the same time, there is a possibility of getting a letter of recommendation from the professor under whom the student has done the internship. Right. So that was a little bit of an overview on undergrad applications. I want to dwell now a little more on the graduate applications. Right. A lot of what we discussed for undergraduate applications remains applicable for graduate students as well. Right. In terms of being able to demonstrate your future potential, in terms of focusing on activities that add value, in terms of scores, etc. One key difference is that scores and GPA play a much more important role in the admission process for graduate students versus undergraduate students, right? So as a engineering student or as a graduate who is looking at doing their masters abroad in an Ivy League university, scores and GPA are going to be extremely important. So these are things that cannot be ignored. Also for students, especially engineering students who want to pursue master's programs abroad, demonstrated sort of experience of involvement in undergraduate research opportunities is important. And we'll talk a little more about this. Also creating personal connections with your professors, because these professors are going to write your letters of recommendation. So you can't just turn up one day before you need the letter of recommendation and request for a letter of recommendation, because then the output is not going to be great, and then that's going to so typically we have seen students who get the best letters of recommendation, the students who have sort of maintained a relationship with that professor over the 3 or 4 year period of their undergraduate studies. So in that case, because the professor knows them really well, and the professor almost has a vested interest in the success of that particular student, the chances of getting a glowing recommendation letter from that professor are very high. And then, of course, writing a killer statement of purpose and or a personal statement, and we'll talk a little more about this. Some of the non-value add activities, right? As an undergraduate student, parents play a very influential role in everything that you do, right? But by the time you finish your undergraduate studies and as you're preparing for your masters, it is extremely important to be able to show your independence and sort of be able to demonstrate that you think for yourself, right? So some of these things are important. One of the sort of feedback that I had for undergrad students also continues for graduate students. Don't do things just for the sake of doing things, just for adding lines to your resume or adding lines to your statement of purpose, because that does not add any value to your application, right? But only activities that you have really done over a period of time and really done well are things that are going to add value to your application. Test scores and GPAs. I think we discussed a little more, or we discussed this a little earlier. For graduate applications, your test scores and your GPA are extremely important, right? So if you're going to the US or many other countries for engineering programs or master's programs, you would have to write your GRE, and it's extremely important to aim very high on your GRE quantitative, right? Typically aim to score 165 plus to have a good chance of getting into a Ivy League university. GRE can also help you make up for a slightly low GPA, right? Not a dramatically low GPA, but a slightly low GPA. TOEFL and IELTS also important. In fact, many top universities require you to have a score of 100 plus on your TOEFL. Some universities also have sectional cutoffs, right? But TOEFL typically has 4 sections: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So universities have cutoffs for each of those individual sections as well. Generally, this is the least I mean, students sort of give the least focus to TOEFL or IELTS, and that can sometimes be a problem because we see a lot of students who have a really good GPA, score well on their GRE, but are become ineligible to apply for certain schools because they don't meet the minimum TOEFL or IELTS requirement. Right? So don't ignore TOEFL or IELTS. It's not a difficult exam, but don't ignore it. GPA extremely important, and GPA, there are two things to your GPA, right? So let's say you've done your undergraduation in computer science, right? And you intend to do your post graduation in data science or data analytics. So not only is your overall GPA important, but for any courses that you have had in your undergraduation, which related to data science and data analytics, your performance in those courses can play a big role in securing admission to a data science or data analytics program. So I'm just using that as an example. Also, a GPA can open up a lot of funding opportunities like research assistantship or teaching assistantship, which can help you work part-time along with professors, and that obviously has two benefits. One is it results in some funding, and two, it also creates a network, and you get to network with professors, etc., which can lead to career and job opportunities or further research opportunities. Also, remember something: GPA is not an absolute, right? Universities understand that in India, especially, colleges are at different levels in terms of quality, right? So, a GPA of 8 from IIT, for example, is obviously much better than a GPA of 9 from a tier 3 university, right? And every university, every top tier university understands this. So, your GPA has to be looked at in the context of the university and program that you did your undergraduation. Undergrad research activities, right? So again, for MS programs in top universities, being able to demonstrate research involvement during your undergraduate studies is extremely important, right? And again, the central point here is don't do something simple which everybody else also does, right? Because these are things which are going to help you uh, distinguish yourself from the competition, right? So these are things where you need to be able to shine, and these are things which are sort of going to be that the last mile in terms of being able to get you into a top university, right? So really focus on this. Don't take the easy way out. Work with the toughest professors or supervisors that you can find. If possible, work with professors who have international experience. And in our experience, we have seen many times that this can actually help, especially for students who come from colleges which might not be very famous, right? So this can make up a little bit for the undergraduation institution. And you have typically 6 or 8 semesters during your undergraduate studies. So sort of plan it out, try and do one activity every semester, right? So it could be a project, could be a presentation, could be some publication, or could also be an internship, right? But just plan it out so that you're doing something unique every semester, which everything adds value to your profile. Then the statement of purpose and essays. Now, everything in your profile sort of comes together in your application documentation, and largely everything comes together in your statement of purpose and essays, right? This is also a place where you can demonstrate or show your personality to your to the admissions committee, and give them a sense that you are not just a culmination of your GPA and your GRE and TOEFL. There is a lot more to you and your personality, which will add value to the university as well, right? So important to use the statement of purpose not just for listing down what you have done, but also sort of add a little bit of personality to your profile. The main objective of the statement of purpose for graduate students is to be able to tell a very compelling story about why you are interested in that particular area. Let's say data science, continuing our earlier example. Why is data science an area of interest for you? What have you done in data science so far? What do you want to achieve with the education that you're planning to do as part of your graduate degree, and how that graduate degree is going to help you achieve your goals. So essentially, this is what you're trying to convey to the university through the statement of purpose and essays. Right. So that was a quick summary of profile building for undergraduate and graduate students who are looking at applying to top universities across the world. To summarize, 2 or 3 points, right? One, future potential, right? With everything that you are doing or everything that you are mentioning in your application profile, you need to be able to demonstrate future potential. 2, don't do things or activities just for adding lines to your CV or adding lines to your statement of purpose, right? All your activities, whether they are curricular or extracurricular activities, should be things that you have done over a period of time, typically over years, and where you have been able to show consistent progression in those activities through achievements, right? Extremely important. Now, I want to touch a little bit on the funding and the cost implications of an Ivy League education. And then I'll talk a little about loans as well before we get into the Q&A. Cost varies from country to country. I have given certain sort of broad benchmarks here for the 4 most popular countries that students go to. And these are costs per year, and these are costs including everything, right? So they'll include tuition fee, they'll include living expenses, they will include insurance and other standard expenses that a student is likely to incur. Okay? And these are costs for Ivy League universities, right? Obviously, in each of these countries, you will probably find universities that are where the cost is going to be lower than these ranges. But most of the Ivy League schools or the top universities in the countries will be in these broad ranges, right? So in the US, you are looking at 30 to 50 lakhs per year. Canada, Australia, and UK are largely similar, where you are looking at costs of 25 to 40 lakh rupees a year. These costs will apply to undergraduate programs and graduate programs excluding MBA, right? So MBA can be significantly higher. In fact, in top sort of 20 universities like Harvard, Wharton, etc., the cost of a 2-year MBA program can easily exceed 1.5 CR. Right? So MBAs can be expensive. Typical durations of programs, that's important because these costs are in terms of per year. Typical durations of the program for undergraduate programs, 3 or 4 years. US has 4-year undergraduate programs. Canada has, there are some universities which have 3-year programs, some universities have 4-year programs. UK and Australia mostly have 3-year programs. UK also, there are certain universities which have 4-year programs. Graduate programs can be 1 or 2 years. Typically in Australia and US, you will have 2-year graduate programs. Most graduate programs in UK will be 1 year. Canada is can sometimes be 1 year or sometimes can be 2 years. Something that everyone is interested in, scholarships and financial aid. So again, I've divided it into undergraduate and graduate. Right? Undergraduate, there are in most cases a lot of merit-based scholarships that are available. But at the same time, in Ivy League schools, scholarships are very competitive, right? So again, all the things that we discussed in terms of profile building, etc., those are the same considerations that go into deciding whether you will get a scholarship or not, right? So again, having an all-round profile, good achievements, being able to demonstrate future potential are all things that will not only get you an admit, but also increase your chances of getting scholarships. Scholarships can cover, I mean, there are universities which might give scholarships for 10% of the tuition fees. There are also universities which might give up to 100% scholarships. But honestly, universities giving more than 20 or 30% are rare. And even for those universities, the number of people to whom, or the number of students to whom those scholarships are given are also very, very small. So the chances are not very high. Also, scholarships are not always for all the years of your program, right? So there are some scholarships which might be recurring scholarships that you get every year. So let's say a university gives you a scholarship of $10,000 per year. In that case, you get $10,000 waived off on your tuition fee every year for the 4 years of your undergraduate program. But then there are also certain universities which will give you scholarships only for the first year, and second year onwards sort of depends on your performance, depends on the budgets that the university has at that point of time, etc. In addition to scholarships, in many cases, on-campus jobs are available. So you could work, let's say, in the library or in the labs or many other sort of areas within the college, and that will help you earn a little bit of money every month, which in many cases can contribute significantly towards at least your living expenses, right? Usually for an undergrad program, this is either unlikely or not recommended during the first year, because as a young 18-year-old student going into a new country, new culture, being independent many times for the first time in their life, it takes some time getting used to, getting adjusted, right? So and anyways, the sort of the course workload is going to be significant. So generally our advice is that undergrad students should ideally not work part-time in the first year. Second year onwards, once they get used to it, once they sort of get sort of ingrained in the local culture, etc., then things become much easier, and that's the time to start exploring on-campus jobs, etc. So that's as far as undergrad students are concerned. Graduate students, typically for Ivy League schools, scholarships or fellowships for MS programs are rare. Okay, so it's not that they don't exist, but they are rare. But assistantships are available, right? So assistantships basically are, they could be like a research assistantship or a teaching assistantship, where you work and assist a professor on their with their teaching duties or with their research sort of activities, and you get paid a stipend for that, right? But again, at Ivy League schools, these tend to be competitive, and a good GPA and good English language score would definitely increase your chances of getting a assistantship. There are some universities, again, this varies from country to country, but especially in UK and in the US, there are some universities which offer what we call a co-op option, where essentially practical experience or internship is part of the program curriculum, right? So you are required to work for anywhere between 2 months to 7 or 8 months as part of the curriculum itself, and typically that work experience is paid work experience, so that allows you to earn a good salary over the period of your co-op, which can sort of contribute a significant part of your education cost. Also, you have on-campus jobs that are usually available. But again, there are certain kinds of programs like MBA or MS in computer science, where the course load is quite high, and not all students might be able to manage a part-time job along with their university program. But in most other cases, doing a part-time job is not only advisable, but it's very, very common. student loans. Right now, a significant percentage of students, in addition to their own personal funds, in addition to any kind of scholarships, assistantships, etc., do also take student loans to be able to fund their education. And this is something that has become a lot more accessible over the last 5 or 7 years. Right? Honestly, 10 years ago, getting education loans for studying abroad used to be extremely difficult. But now there are a lot of options, a lot of lenders that are available. I've sort of put it out here in terms of what the various options are for undergrad and grad students. I don't mind sharing this document with all the participants as well, so that you can go through this and understand this a little more. But bear in mind that getting loans is not very difficult. A lot of options will be available. There are certain things or certain countries where it is easier to get a loan compared to some other countries. Those are things that you should consider while choosing which university or which country to go to for your higher education or for your child's higher education. But in general, education loans are available and are not that difficult to secure. So that's pretty much what I had. I have our contact details here. So if anyone sort of wishes to get in touch for more information, more details, etc., please sort of feel free to connect. I am happy to take questions now. I think we already had a couple of messages, so I'm just going to quickly open that. Okay, so I have a question from Garima. What sort of degree is advisable for someone who has done a master's from an Indian university and a PGDM as well? So Garima, it's very, I mean, unless we understand more details in terms of the profile, unless we understand where your interests lie, etc., it is very hard to give an answer to this. But suffice to say that there are lots of students who have done a master's degree in India and then choose to go abroad to do another master's degree as well. But there has to be some logic or rationale to it.
Thanks a lot for answering my question. Actually, why I asked you this question is because I have a work ex of around 6 years in banking industry. I have a PGDM and a master's, which is in master's in commerce. So, if I wanted to study abroad, what would like obviously my work ex in future would be in banking and finance only. So that is why I was just asking this question. So where to start about if I want to go, let's say I just want to, because I just got married. So my husband is in ACCA already. So we're planning to do something abroad, but I'm not able to understand my career perspective per se. That is why I joined this Zoom call.
Perfect. So look, I mean, for someone who has 5 or 6 years of work experience, essentially you are looking at doing a study abroad program to fast track your career, right? So you need to look at what are the kind of programs that could help you do that. One that comes to mind is a MBA. It's typically something that students with significant amount of work experience end up doing, right? But MBA is something that you also have to be careful about, right? Because these days there are multiple, even in a university, in a particular university, there are probably 10 different kinds of MBA programs that are offered. Right, so you have a MBA, then you might have a master MBA in international business. You might have a MBA in executive MBA. You might have a MBA which is specialized in, let's say, digital marketing, and so on and so forth. Also, now there are different views on this, but my general belief is that an MBA is a degree which can add value to you only if you do it from a top 50 university globally, right? So if your intention is to do a MBA program focus on getting an MBA program from a top 50 university.
Okay.
If that is not a possibility, and if you end up doing a master's, any other master's program, let's say you are interested in finance, for example, right? So you might choose to do something like master's in finance, or you could do something like a master's in financial engineering, or so many different programs available in within the finance domain as well, or the banking domain as well. So it's outside of the top 50 schools, my general recommendation is that you should focus on doing programs in specific areas rather than generic programs like a MBA, right? Because the value of an MBA really is only in the top 50 schools across the world. Also bear in mind, this is something that I mentioned, MBAs are typically, the programs are typically a lot more expensive than normal master's program, right? So your investment is also that much higher. Which is also why you will only get a return on your investment if you are doing it from a top 50 university. Right? So in your case, you might want to explore something like, I mean, unless, so it could either be a top 50 MBA, or you could explore something like a master's in finance or a master's in financial engineering, or there are, especially in countries like Ireland, etc., there are a lot of banking related programs as well, master's programs. So given that your interest is in banking and finance, that could also be something that you could explore.
Yeah, one last question before I end. Thank you very much for answering my question, first of all. The other question was that I've heard generally, like in India, what happens is that you've got into a stream, then you study that, and then you can only, make your career in that particular field. However, I've heard that out of India, things are pretty flexible. So let's say right now I've done something in banking, and tomorrow I have an interest in psychology. So maybe I can go abroad and study in psychology and fetch a job there. Is that true? I mean, comparatively, if we talk about.
Okay, so this is a very good question, and we see a lot of this. So there are two aspects to this. Okay, one is, will you get admission to a master's in psychology program if you have a background in banking and finance? Possibly, there might be some universities where you will be able to get admission, but where we find this becoming a problem is in getting visas, right? Because if you are not able to justify a clear linkage between your education, your work experience, and the program that you want to study after going abroad, if there is no clear logical extension, that can create problems in getting your visas approved. Right, so this is something that we have seen, because again, from the visa officer's perspective, there is no rationale to this, right? So the only rationale to this would be someone is just desperate to go abroad and is choosing to go abroad in whatever course he or she gets an admission. Right? That might not, and again, I don't want to say that that is the rationale in all the cases. There are some very genuine cases where people are interested in doing something different, and people have successfully done that. But this is something that you have to take into consideration while making your choice, because this question is definitely going to come up during the visa interview.
Okay, so you're saying one, it has to be genuine, and second, it has to be explained properly to the visa officer. Only then there are chances.
And it has to be genuine, and also think about it from your own career perspective, right? I mean, you've done something for years and years. You've studied 4 or 5 years. You've worked in a particular industry for 5 or 6 years, and then you do a 1 or 2 year program to completely change your career in a field which is completely unrelated, right? So it is something that is going to have an impact on your career as well, right? So that's also something that you should consider, right? Again, what I'm saying is people have done this successfully also, but it just needs proper thought, thinking, and proper planning.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Gautam.
Great. So I have a question here from Hurvaksh. Where do we manage to get someone to mentor our daughter who is in 9th standard going in 10th? So Hurvaksh, great question. And for this, you get in touch with me. So I can definitely assist you with that.
Thank you. Thanks, buddy.
Yes. Aditya has a question. Is it okay to do a master's in sports science post BTech? So Aditya, I think we sort of covered this when we discussed about Garima's question. because this is again a case where you want to change your stream completely. In this case, I'm assuming you don't have a lot of work experience, right? So you've done your BTech, maybe you have a year or so, year or two of work experience. It might be easier to do at this stage compared to doing it after 5 or 6 years of work experience. But it's again something that you need to sort of think through and plan for, right? So I would say it's not impossible to do. It's definitely something that you can do, but sort of needs to be planned for.
Thank you.
Perfect. Do we have any further questions? Urvaksh, I've answered. Anything else?
Gautam, I had a question.
Sure.
So my son is now going in 12th grade.
Okay.
He's more somehow inclined towards studying in Europe, say in a country like Germany rather than US or UK.
Okay.
So the criteria for admission, I'm a little, some say only ACT is enough, some say you have to write IELTS also. So it's become very confusing for me. In addition to it, for Germany, what kind of scores are required? And the social service that you talked about, that is not there. Sports is there. He's played a lot of sport. He's pretty good in studies, but sports and internships is not there. Oh, sorry, community service and internships is not there. So can he do it now?
Okay. So which field does he want to study?
Engineering.
Okay. Is that more sort of mechanical engineering?
Robotics in artificial intelligence.
Okay. So look, I think SAT, you mentioned SAT. So either SAT or ACT. So not all German universities actually require a SAT or ACT, right? Some of them do, some of them don't. But even for universities who do not require that, if you submit a score, that can actually add value to your application, right? So I would generally recommend for top universities, always submit a SAT or ACT. IELTS, I think almost every university in Germany will require an IELTS, right? There might be some exceptions, but IELTS will be required because again, in most of the cases, the medium of instruction is going to be English.
Okay.
Right, so IELTS will be required. Apart from that, look, Germany, great place to study, especially anything related to mechanical engineering, robotics, etc. They are the world leaders when it comes to especially manufacturing related engineering, mechanical, etc. Where we have found a challenge with students in the past in Germany is students underestimate the importance of becoming fluent in the local language, right? Because for education, it's not really a problem because in most cases, the medium of instruction is going to be English. However, to successfully get a job after graduation and continue to live in Germany or any other country in continental Europe for that matter, being fluent in written and spoken English is extremely important, right? And some students or some kids pick up new languages very quickly. Some of them don't, right? So only you and your son can be the best judge of that. And again, based on my experience, students who come from a science engineering background typically take a little more time to pick up a new language compared to someone who comes from a more creative background. Right? So that's again something that we have seen with so many students. So my suggestion would be, has he enrolled in any German classes?
No, he is not, but I've looked for it. There is a compulsion. They have to learn
A1.
Apply for.
Yeah, so he needs to complete A1 before he can apply. But A1 is the absolute bare minimum, right? So that's not a level which is even going to help him converse day to day when he goes to Germany. So for all practical purposes, before he actually travels, he should at least be doing A2 so that he can have regular, at least the normal day-to-day conversations in the local language, and that will also give him a sense of how comfortable he feels in becoming fluent in that language. Right? So that's an important consideration because we've seen so many times students and not so many undergrad, but definitely graduate students who go there thinking they'll pick up the language, but unfortunately are not able to do it and then struggle to get a job.
Yeah.
Did I answer all the questions?
No, the community service and the internship.
Okay, so community service and internship, right? Look, in the best case scenario, obviously doing something over a very short period of time does not add the same value as something being done over a period of years. But at the same time, it adds more value than having not done anything at all, right?
Okay.
So definitely doing something will help. Whether it's an look, there are so many opportunities these days, right? I mean, even something like a Teach for India, which is something which is very easy to do. It's something that kids will enjoy. It's something that he can take up, do it for 4 or 5 months, and sort of talk about it in his or her application.
Mm-hmm. And internships, international internships, is it compulsory or can they do local internships? Which
So
I suppose.
international internships are not compulsory. In fact, nothing is actually compulsory apart from the transcripts, etc. So international internships are not compulsory. Local internships are also fine. And in fact, for undergraduate studies, internships are not something that will matter a lot, right? So in fact, I would suggest he focus on other things like his language, German language, getting some community service, etc., and possibly working a little more on his extracurriculars, something that he's been doing over a period of time, but also continuing to do.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, God.
Internships are more important for graduate students.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, God.
No problem.
Hi Gautam, Srinivas here from Hyderabad.
Hi, Srinivas.
Hi. So what kind of support all of us can expect from you, your company, and what kind of things that you do? Services.
Okay. So essentially, we provide support. So I'll tell you what kind of students work with us. Okay. So at one level, we get a lot of students who are in their 8th standard or 9th standard who are just starting to build up their profiles in anticipation of going abroad for their education after the 12th standard. Right? So we typically end up working with them over 3 or 4 years. Right? And out of which the first 3 years are not focused on the university applications at all. They are more focused on things like extracurriculars, what are the things that you need to do to build your profile, and a general understanding of what all needs to be done, and then sort of follow through on all those activities, right? So I think I don't know if we have Advait here, but I saw Advait was here. So he's actually one of our students. He's a son of someone who works out of Ikeva. And Advait has been doing, or in fact he'll be starting his international internship in the first week of May, right? So some of these things, again, for not everyone needs to be doing the same things, right? Depending on what your aspirations are, which country you intend to go to, what kind of programs you're looking for, there is a different pathway that needs to be followed. So we typically work with students from standard 8, standard 9, etc. going forward. Even things like that early in standard 8 or standard 9, the student or the parents are not even sure of what the student wants to study after 12th standard, right? Because the exposure is not there. While there might be certain ideas, certain ambitions, certain goals, etc., there is no complete clarity, and things change over those 3 or 4 years, right? So we also play a role in terms of guiding the student's thought process in such a way that he or she is able to make the right decision when it comes to choosing a course. And there are various tools that are employed, right? So we do aptitude testing. In addition to that, there are a lot of one-to-one interactions that we do with the student, some with the parent involved, some without the parent involved, etc., which can sort of help us guide the student in the best possible way. So that's a process, or that's a sort of service that we call early advising, right? So because typically students start with us in standard 8 or standard 9, you'll be surprised we have had students or parents come to us asking for support for students in standard 3. Okay, now honestly I say no to them, because it's not something that should be done at all, because that's too early to be doing anything. So I generally don't recommend starting anything till 8th or 9th standard. Okay, so that's typically it. So that's the first aspect. Then the second aspect is the actual university application process, right? So when the student is ready to apply and the profile building, etc., has been done, figuring out the right countries to apply for, right? Because every country is different. Every country has its own pros. Every country has its own cons. A lot of things are evolving, right? Because ultimately, even the immigration situation needs to be kept in mind, because the student intends to stay back in the country after the education, work for a few years. So, and that situation keeps on evolving very, very quickly. Right? I mean, We see what has happened in the US for the last 3 years. UK, which used to be closed, is now suddenly opened up. So things keep on evolving. So a lot of those things go into deciding which country would be most suitable for that particular student. And then after the country, figuring out the universities that should be applied to, the programs that should be applied to, and working on the applications, the various documents that I spoke about, the statement of purpose, letters of recommendation, etc. Filing the application. And then once the applications are received, actually, typically students end up applying to 7 or 8 universities, and they'll get admits from at least 3 or 4 universities out of those. So then even the decision-making process in terms of which out of those 3 or 4 universities need to be, should the student end up going to, right? So so we sort of help students with that. And then the funding and financing bit, right? So in fact, I would say one of our core areas of strength is student loans. We can figure out the best student loan options for the student, not only from lenders in India, but also from lenders outside of India. Right? So the only thing that we do not do in this entire study abroad value chain is test prep, right? So we don't have classroom sessions to prepare students for GRE exam or GMAT or TOEFL or IELTS, etc. We do have some online modules through our partnership with companies such as Princeton Review, etc. But we don't do classroom training for these test prep.
So there must be a lot of agencies, around the country who are doing the similar work. Is there any kind of registration body which regulates these agencies so that you can find good ones around your city?
So
that,
yeah. Unfortunately, no. I wish there was, because as you said, there are many companies who do that, which is why what I generally advise students is that it's not the company that matters so much, right? I think what the student should do is go and have a chat with 3 or 4 different companies, see the comfort level that they feel with that particular counselor, right? And then make a decision based on who they feel most comfortable with, right? Because even if it's a company which is a well-known large company, and there are some large companies in this space like IDP, Advise, etc., really large companies, but ultimately your experience will boil down to the counselor that you are working with. Right, so it's very important to go and have a chat with 3 or 4 different counselors, and then make a decision based on who you feel most comfortable working with. Because, and also, so there's another thing, right? So in this industry, you either have counselors or you have agents, right? Typically, the larger ones will tend to be agents who probably will charge very little or sometimes even nothing from the student. But essentially, the revenue model is earning revenue or earning commissions from universities, right? And I mean, I don't need to explain the kind of conflict of interest that a model such as that creates, because then the incentive is not to figure out what is the best option for the student. It is more about figuring out where am I maximizing my revenue. Right? So I think I typically don't advise going to agents. You're much better off working with a counselor.
And then we also hear a lot about fake universities in America. There are also a lot of cases there. So how do we ensure that we are talking to the right universities?
So actually, that is not such a big problem, right? Because in the US, for example, there is the Home Affairs Ministry actually maintains a list of approved universities, right? So it's very easy to go and verify if a particular university is approved or it is not approved, and it's the same in other countries as well, right? So, but again, the challenge here is students or parents might not always be sure of how to go and check it. But it's very easy and straightforward to actually go to the government website and get a list of approved universities. And honestly, I know there has been a lot of publicity with respect to cases where students have ended up in trouble because of going into or sort of getting admitted to problematic universities. But believe me, it was not that the students were doing it without their knowledge, right? I mean, most cases, the students were aware of what they were getting into, but this was the path of least resistance and which, the easy way out which the students, so it was a risk that the students knowingly decided to take, and it backfired. And it almost always backfires, right? I mean, even if it doesn't backfire immediately, sometime in the future it will always come back to bite you, right? So again, not a good idea to take the easiest path. I always say, even if it's not the top or the Ivy League universities, honestly, if you're not going to the top 100 universities in the US or top 20 universities in any other country, it's not worth it, right? For the cost that is involved, for the experience that you will get, you are much better off studying in India.
Thank you.
Okay. So I have another question here from Nishit. Okay, Nishit. So, so Nishit's question is about the current situation, where he's talking about a lot of students opting for online courses via Harvard, etc. And do I think this will be the trend in the near future? So, Nishit, I think use of technology for higher education is not something that has happened just now, right? In the current circumstances, it's been happening, and it's been increasing over a period of time. I mean, we are all aware of, I mean, you have mentioned the Harvard online courses, but in addition to that, there are startups like Coursera, like Udacity, etc., which have made large businesses out of providing these online courses. Right? So definitely, this is something that has already been happening, and this will continue to happen. Do I think this is something that is going to replace on-campus university education? I don't think in the short term, because the value that on-campus university interaction can add to the student, both in terms of interaction with the faculty, but also more importantly in terms of interaction with the peer group, right? The other students that are part of your class, etc. So your overall educational experience is not just what is taught to you in the classroom, right? There's a lot more to your educational experience, where you learn a lot from your peer group, etc., and networks outside of classroom as well. And those opportunities will become very limited if the entire education system moves completely online. So I think that is one reason. Also, think about why majority of the Indian students, or not just Indian, majority of students choose to study abroad, right? So the entire reason for, or a large sort of percentage of the motivation is to get an ability to work in that particular country and potentially stay in that country for a few years, right? So if you were able to replace on-campus education by online education, that opportunity would not exist, because then there is no reason to travel to the US. You can study at Harvard from your home in India. So I think there are always going to be two kinds of education. So any formalized tertiary education, university education, will still, I think, at least for the foreseeable future, continue to be on campus at university with more and more technological sort of interventions. But then there is also going to be a parallel sort of upskilling kind of education, the kind of courses that Coursera provides or Udacity provides, where even working professionals sort of keep on updating themselves, keep on enhancing their knowledge, which will continue to be, or in fact, that industry will grow, and that will mostly be online.
Thanks, Bob.
I have another question here from Mathan. What type of questions will there be in a visa interview, specific to subject we have chosen, or general questions? Okay, so Mathan, US is the only country where you actually have a visa interview, right? In most other cases, it's just a visa application that you put in, and your visa gets approved based on the documents that you have submitted, except unless there are certain exceptional circumstances which require the applicant to go for an interview. Okay? So only US is the country where your visa decision is based on an interview that happens. Now, what types of questions are concerned, or what types of questions are asked? Honestly, there is, I mean, we typically have a list of 500 plus questions that are asked, right? So rather than giving you a sense of what kind of questions are asked, I think what I'll try and give you a sense of is what is the visa officer trying to assess, right? So that will give you a better sense of the possible line of questioning that might be there in a visa interview. The first thing that the visa interviewer is trying to assess is your motivation to go abroad, right? So they are basically trying to assess whether you are a genuine student who is going there for the sole purpose of education, right? So they are trying to assess whether, so if you are going there for the purposes of immigration, etc., and if that comes out in any of your answers, that can result in a visa rejection. The second thing that the visa officer is trying to assess is whether you have ties back to your home country, which will make sure that you come back to India after you finish your education. Right? So ties back to the home country can be multiple things. It could be through your parents who live in India. It could mean some kind of property or assets that you have in India. So many, so there could be multiple things that could create a tie back to the home country. So as far as US visa interviews are concerned, these are two things that they are primarily trying to establish. One is whether you are a genuine student going solely for the purposes of education, and two, whether you have ties back to the home country, so that there is a high probability of you coming back to India. Right? So those are two things that the interviewer is trying to assess. So I hope that sort of gives you a sense of what to expect in a visa interview.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions?
Gautam, in addition to these undergrad and grad programs, do you also have programs in vocational education? Is there any demand for that? Do you work on that as well?
So we do. There isn't a large number of students who go to study vocational, but there are. I know we had a student some time ago who wanted to study heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, and wanted to study that in Canada. So, see, vocational education is actually very profession specific. There are countries where the immigration system is a points-based immigration system, right? So depending on what you study, you get a certain number of points. And there are certain vocations which are a lot in demand in that particular country, and local sort of manpower for those jobs is not available. So those professions in those countries, this is especially true in Australia and in Canada. Actually, a lot more in Australia than in Canada also, but to some extent in Canada. And now UK, which is also planning to come up with a points-based immigration system from 1st of January 2021, is likely to have something on the similar lines as Australia. Right? So vocational training, you basically have to look at what kind of points that particular program is going to give you, because otherwise the chances of being able to stay back and work in that vocation in that particular country are not very high.
Right. I heard there is a parallel system in UK as well, Edexcel or something like that.
Correct. So UK, I think that's something that is definitely going to come up from next year, given the changes in their immigration policy.
Thank you.
Great. So do we have any other questions?
Gautam, I have a question.
Yes, Meghna.
A lot of students, specifically when they go for MS, they plan to switch their program, like a lot of them, since there's like a general impression that computer science is a course which is, of high demand and all of that. Of course, that is the case in most of the, places in the US. Of course, universities outside Ivy, it's still possible. But how easy or difficult it is to get into an Ivy League college without belonging to the similar background? Because I had like 2 students I was chatting with, and they were really, really confused about it. I mean, they've got a good profile, but they want to switch the program. And do you think with certain prerequisites, it's pretty possible to get into an Ivy League with a switch in the program?
So again, like there are certain programs which are in very high demand. Computer science is typically one of them in whatever university you choose. So the sort of bar for admission is high for any computer science program in any Ivy League school, right? So I would think that getting into a computer science program from a non-computer science background would be quite difficult, and chances would not be very high. However, within the computer science department in most universities, including Ivy League schools, there are other programs, right, which are not exactly computer science programs, but you could have something on the lines of MIS, which is Management of Information Systems, or Information Systems, or Computer Engineering, or Software Engineering, etc., which are sort of similar to computer science, but not exactly computer science, where the bar of or it's easier to get admission compared to computer science, right? So I wouldn't rule out completely for a non-computer science student to get admit to a computer science, especially if he or she has a phenomenal profile like a 335 on their GRE and a 9+ on their GPA, etc. It's possible, but I would still say that the chances are relatively low. But still, there are other programs within the computer science department that can definitely be explored.
Sure. Thank you.
Great. All right. So if I think we are done with most of the questions. So if I think thanks so much again for Aikiva and for Radhika for organizing this, and thanks to everyone for attending.
Thank you, Gautam. The session has been very informative. It has
Thanks,
clarified a lot
Gautam.
of doubts for lots of people, and I'm sure we'll get back to you with more information.
No problem. And I'll also share the presentation with Radhika so that she can share it with anyone who is interested.
Yes.
Yes,